Have you ever wondered what it'd be like to be an orphan in the 1800s and figure out where your next family is going to be? No, me either. That sounds honestly pretty bad. And sometimes when I think about my own family, as bad as it can be, I'm always happy I still have them around and I'm not an orphan because you never know how it's going to be in a climate like today. Like, think about how many kids are literally in the orphan or are in foster care or looking for adoption. Many of them age out the system and have nowhere to be, and then we blame it all on criminals when it's just the lack of a family. And you really can't blame too many people for not wanting to either adopt or even want to keep their own kids because everyone goes through circumstances and it's very hard for the average person to make sure their family is okay. But what if you had no choice but to give up your kid or your child was met in an unfortunate circumstance that forced them to go and find a new home on their own? That is more or less the story of the new book I just finished called The Orphan Train. It is actually based on a real life scenario that occurred in the 1800s when a bunch of orphans were left in an orphanage, as they are, and people thought to themselves, well, they need to go somewhere and they can't stay there because obviously without guidance and a family, only the worst thing can happen. And there is a movie based on this, but it is based on just what happened during the whole thing in the 1800s. It's not based on the actual book. So if you do see it, not the same, but it is related. And per usual, spoilers. So this book takes place in the early 1940s, 1930s actually. And it's this woman who came from Ireland with her family when she was really young. And they moved from Ireland to America, New York for a better life. She had two brothers, one sister, one mom, and one dad. Not the best family, I would say. It was actually pretty dysfunctional, but for the most part, they were together, though very poor. And during this time, Ireland and people of those descents were not very well received. And it was kind of obvious for her because she had the typical red hair looking like Miranda for Brave, even though I think her hair was a bit more straight based on the picture. But essentially, when they moved there, they couldn't find any jobs. It was very hard for them to live off anywhere. Even the place they were staying, even for New York standards, was pretty small and definitely cost a pretty penny to live there during the 1800s. But tragedy was struck when a few years later, a huge fire broke out in their apartment. No one really knows how it came to be. But when it happened, her whole family was considered deceased and she was the only living member. At this point, she's like 8, 9 years old. She's not the oldest sibling, but she's like, I want to say middle child probably. And she goes to an orphanage still in New York, I assume. And around this time, she met other orphans who were there, and they were all just kind of waiting and figuring out what was going to happen because they range anywhere from like 16 to a literal infant. So everyone had their own circumstances. And around this time, there was a society called the Child Aid Society or the Children's Aid Society, where they took kids on this train, took them all the way through the entire country to the end of Minnesota or Massachusetts. They went different routes. And they would take them on different platforms on the train stations to kind of give them away to parents for free. Basically, it's like giving away livestock, but instead of you trading, you're just telling them, hey, take them to school, make sure they're well off, and treat them like family, but without the CPS portion of it all. So she goes on this train and she's meeting up with these other orphans who are on there, and they're on it for a very long time. They cross to Massachusetts, Chicago, other parts of Illinois, and they finally reach Minnesota. And every place they go to, they stop there and they take off the train. Certain kids get off, they're taken by certain people, legally taken, because they are either seen as a baby, for one, is a great addition to a new family that can't have a kid. If you're a boy but of younger age, then you're a great addition to a farm and you're allowed to like work there but not make money. And if you're a young girl, some people might see you as the next upcoming whatever for their family. So you're kind of forced to accumulate to their lives. But for the main character, who we're going to call Vivian, because I can't pronounce her Irish name, and she went through like 4 names because each family gave her a different name. So we're sticking with the last one, which is Vivian. She goes all the way to the end of the train and she meets up with her first family looking for another kid to take care of because they own a sweatshop. Essentially, they're sewing clothes for high ladies of standards in the state of Minnesota, and she just one of the many girls who was in there making clothes. She is fed, she is bathed, but she is not going to school, even though they told the people at the child aid society, that they would take her. But while she's there, she is just forced to accommodate to that life, and everything she learned from her family, she basically has to like unlearn or forget about, because no one in this new family is taking care of her, like at all. Like some of the oldest people there are like in their 50s. I don't think they're ready to take care of an 8-year-old kid. So for the longest time, she was just there. And then for a few years goes by and a recession happens. Not sure what it happens in the early 40s or early 30s. Couldn't tell you what recession was going on, but it was happening. A lot of kids couldn't get paid anymore, so they kind of left or they went to a different family. She was returned back to the orphan society because they no longer can afford to keep her, which is really feeding her. She was free labor. So she went from this family to another family. And this family was also not looking for another kid. They actually had 4 kids on their own, and they were not taking care of them. So let me set the scene. You're on this farm that has no electricity in the early 1800s, and you already have 4 kids who are probably sharing one bedroom, and you have a mother who is suppressed, a father who leaves all day to go catch food and comes back at night and doesn't even hug his own kids. And you're just another attachment to this family, and your main role is to take care of the kids, I would only assume. But in this home, she is given a chance to go to school. So she is going to like the closest school that she has gotten, and actually several years since her family initially passed. And since that time, school was her way of escaping reality, because the home that she lived in is actually worse, if that's possible. It was worse than the time that she was living with the first family, because she slept on hay, had to leave in the dark, barely had any real food. The mom hated her because she's Irish and because she's a girl that's like at this point 10 years old. And the kids won't ever stop clinging to her because they're desperate for love, like she is. And all she can do is look at them in despair, because it's like, I don't know why you're touching me. I also need what you're looking for. And throughout this time, the only person she really had as a person she could trust was her teacher. But how do you tell a teacher that you're an orphan and you have to get a family, but no family wants you for real? They just want to either use you or see you as a product to like push around and discard eventually. So eventually, I think a year or so goes by, and she's living with this family. And during this time, the dad is getting a lot closer to her. He's realizing, oh, she's actually listening to my stories, because he hates his kids. Point blank, period, hates his kids. Don't know why he has 4, but he hates his kids. He has another one on the way, so I don't know what is going on, but he hates the kids. He wish he never got married. Don't know what's going on. But he gets close to her. And at first, it seems like, okay, someone who actually cares, who wants to listen to her, doesn't treat her like she's just nothing. But it's obviously not for the good or right reasons, because she eventually runs away from home because he tries to essay her while she was asleep. So she runs away from home all the way to the school, which is miles away. And then she lives with her teacher for a few days after that point, because she can't go back to that home. Also, she was being kicked out by the mom when she found out that the husband was trying to essay the daughter, or Vivian, because she blamed Vivian. So yeah, not a good time to be her, essentially, or be in that time period for really anyone. So she lives with her teacher for a few days, and it's honestly probably one of the best few days she ever had since she came to America. Even her real family wasn't that great. But of course, it can't last. Her teacher can't keep her. So she essentially gets moved over from the initial family to a whole nother family a few weeks later, and they are called the Nelsons. It is a mom and pop who used to have a daughter who unfortunately passed away a few years prior, and they have adopted this girl, renamed her to be their late daughter, old name Vivian, a few years later. It wasn't instant, like they got her and said, "You're Vivian." It was a few years later, because at the time they also didn't want a daughter. That seems to be the common theme in this book, is that no one wants her, but they all seem to want her for a reason. But the reason they adopted her is because they had a store that they were taking care of, and they was teaching her how to run their store. It's a merchandise mart. They're doing retail. They were selling the newest things in the high city of, you think I would know the state by now, Virginia or something. And because she was there, she was really good with accounting, really good with numbers, knew the highest trends, knew how to get them for cheap, sell them for high. So she became really quickly part of the family. But even to her, no matter how close they got, even getting on the new name of Vivian, none of it felt like a real family to her. It just felt like another home to be in. but it was a lot better because she had her own bed, she made her own money, she went to her own school, she got to do her own things. It was never, you take care of this, you do it for us, and we give you nothing. It's like, you do whatever you want as long as you help run the store. And honestly, the best she could have asked for. Did she feel the love that she lost from everywhere else? A little bit, a little bit. She felt a little bit of the love, but when you feel so much nothingness for so long, and most of the nothingness comes from like all the wrong emotions, like anger, sadness, despair. When you feel nothing, you kind of feel like you made it to happiness in a way. So that's what she was going through. But years go by, she goes to college. She actually went to St. Olaf, which is kind of funny, kind of almost applied to that school. Anyway, she goes to St. Olaf University, and there she hangs out with these new two girls that she kind of met. They go to this nightclub. Her first time going out and doing what she wants, but now says want her to have fun because she's 19. She can do whatever she wants. So she goes there, meet up with the girls, have a decent time. Wouldn't say it's her best. And she meets one of the kids that she rode on the train with, whose original name was Dutchy, and his new name was Luke or Luke Hans. And essentially, they hook up pretty quickly because they're the only two people who know each other's true-ish story. She is holding things back, which you'll later find out, but true-ish stories. And essentially, they get married 10 months later. He is essentially her love of the life. 10 months is really quick, I know. But they've known each other since they were like 10, and he was like probably 11 or 12. And this is the first time they met each other in like those many years that they have been apart. And his story goes that after he left the train, he was taken by a family who wanted him only for farm work, and then abused him to the point where he ran away several times and almost died, got to a hospital, went to the actual family that was a farmer as well, but taught him piano, and now he's a pianist. He does bars and clubs, and eventually teaches at a school. So that's pretty good for him. They both have terrible lives, but at the end result, it's been pretty good and led them back to each other. So when that's all happening, they get together and the war on Pearl Harbor starts. So people are getting drafted, people are leaving, they're just going to war. And he goes to war eventually too. And during this time, Vivian is pregnant with their first kid, and they're writing letters back and forth, which is great, amazing. They're all hoping everything goes well. He comes back home. And then a few months later, a letter comes in and says that Dutchy was killed in action due to his plane being shot out of the sky. And because of another heartbreak, and because she is still pregnant, she just moves on pretty quickly, but not in a way of like, oh, I don't care, but more of, oh, I'm not going to deal with this sadness right now because this only adds on to her level of sadness that she felt in her life. So a few months go by, she gives birth, and she finally gives birth to a beautiful baby girl. And it's a great occasion, but she's so depressed that she can't take care of this baby for many reasons that are all really obvious. She's depressed. She never knows true love. She doesn't know how she's going to love someone when she lost her own love. So she gives up the baby to the hospital. And then she goes back, lives her own life, and then essentially meets Dutchy's best friend, who's also a trainer named Jim Daly. And they eventually get married. And the love isn't as strong as her and Dutchy, but it's enough for her. And then something years later, I guess he dies in his early 50s, 60s, 70s. They don't say when he dies, but she's like in her 90s when she's retelling the story. And now we get to the other part. When she's retelling this story, she's telling this to a young girl named Molly, who is also in the foster care system. Her dad is dead, but her mom is somewhere in prison or mental hospital, and she's living with a foster parent that doesn't care about her, and the foster dad doesn't seem to want to really help her past just being like, oh, let it be, whatever. So she goes to be, instead of just in juvie for a crime of stealing a book, she goes and help out Vivian, who was in her 90s at the time of 2011 when she's telling the story to her. And they're supposed to do 50 hours together. Basically, she cleans her house, and Vivian be like, okay, 50 hours, whatever. And essentially, Vivian ends up telling Molly this story eventually, like in completion by the time the book ends. And Molly's wondering why she gave up the baby. Who knew she had a baby? Who knew she even gave it up? And the only person who knew was her foster mom, Mrs. Nelson. But at the time, she didn't believe Mrs. Nelson could take care of the baby because she was okay with her giving up the baby because she knew how like depressed she was. But also, at the end of the day, Mrs. Nelson still needed help in the store, so I don't think she would have been okay if a baby was realistically in the picture as well. So while Vivian expressed deep regret for giving up her one and only child, she also doesn't seem how she could possibly have taken care of the kid if she had it in her circle. But with Molly's help, she was able to track down where her daughter was to this day, because outside of her daughter, she also figured out that her younger sister that I said she had in the beginning, named Maisie, was actually still alive when, we all thought she had died in the early 1940s or 1930s. She has since passed in her 80s a few years prior, so 2008 or something, but she was alive the entire time and no one ever told her. And Molly just told Vivian at the time. So that was another heartache she had to experience recently. But she was able to contact her daughter, who was in her 70s at this time. And her daughter has her own kids. She has a little girl named Betty, who's 11 years old and looks just like Vivian in the picture, actually. And they get to meet. And that's where the story kind of ends. And it's a story filled with, at the very end, one love that she could never truly experience. And the whole idea of the orphan train it's not even fictional. It really happened. It was established in like 1822, like I said in the beginning, and it was from the Children's Aid Society. The whole point was to get kids from like urban settings, because she was originally from New York City, and she went all the way to Minnesota, crossing through like every farmland that was there just to go back to where it was more or less urban, right? But the whole point was to take these kids out of like destitute areas where they were almost guaranteed not to have a good life, and bring them places where they almost expected them to be seen as only products for the family to use, because not a lot of people wanted orphans, especially if they couldn't actually use them for farm work, sewing, or just the worst abuse you probably know. Unless you're like a literal 5 year old or a child or a baby, then yeah, sure, they want you. You're great. You're like what they're looking for. But if you're like her, who's Irish, 8 years old, and just doesn't look the cleanest she could ever look, yeah, no. So, but it was a real story. At least the orphan train is real. This story itself may have been fictional with fictional characters, but it was a real incident that really did happen. And as I said before, there is a movie about the orphan train as a whole. The movie itself, I did not watch it as a synopsis, but it was about this woman who saw the death of a teenager because of a crime that he commits against a police officer. And she decided her and her husband should open up a train station, open up a train, take all the kids who need a family on there, take them around the whole country, and give them away to people who potentially can take care of them. Apparently, in the movie, it's a lot more happy ending. It came out in 1976, so pretty old film. But in reality, it had a lot of controversy because a lot of kids did end up not meeting a family or dying because of their new family, or just not being taken care of at all. Because, like I said, one of the requirements was to take the kids to school, but no one was verifying. It's like giving kids to a foster family now and then not having CPS there. It's like at that point, who is verifying these kids are doing well? Sometimes CPS kind of drops the ball too. But in all that to say, the orphan train no longer exists. I hope. I didn't verify that for real, but I'm sure we would know a bunch of kids were getting off a train station at this point. But that is the story that is in this book. And I could say this story was pretty sad for most of it, because nothing about being on a train filled with other orphans and honestly being one of the last people to get a family, like, her story is depressing. And honestly, outside of her meeting her daughter again, it doesn't really get that much better. She's also like the oldest, not the oldest living, but she's one of the people who still survived the train, who was still alive in the book, essentially. Because a lot of people that she knew, even the baby that she held in the train, had died a few years ago in his 80s. So it's like you're older than a lot of people, and yet you're still living, but yet you hold so much sadness based on your life that you kind of have to like move away from, because that's just another day in your life. But all that to say, if you are looking for a good read, And honestly, it wasn't that long. It had like the next book in here, like a little prequel. I didn't read it yet, but it has like 273 pages, and it's really good. I don't know if y'all are book readers. I assume you have to be in some regards, but it's by Christina Baker Killer, Count Klein or whatever. I got it for free. I don't know where I got it from, but it was really good. It's amazing. And there is a movie. I don't know if you want to watch it. It's on YouTube. It looks really dusty, but I'm sure it's good. There's probably a bunch of other books about the orphan train as well. They all seem to be very similar to what I've read in this book. So go and check that out as well. But yeah, I will see you guys in my next video. Halloween is coming up. October will be here, or probably is here by the time you see this video. So I will see you guys then. Bye. Thanks for watching.